Dr. Ace Simpson is our speaker for today. He's a visiting professor of management at Manhattan University and director of the Center for Compassion Studies in New York and a research advisor to the Center for Positive Organizations at the University of Michigan. I'm going to post his whole bio here so you don't have to hear me read that all. But let me just say that I find it fascinating, and it only totally makes sense that somebody who combines positive organizational scholarship and critical management studies uses paradox to understand how how toxic leadership, bullying, power dynamics, and the like are experienced in the workplace. And so we are so delighted to have him speak to us today on his topic of the toxic wins and looking at that dark triad. So without further ado, I'll turn over to Dr. Simpson.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Grateful to be here. Thank you for that kind invitation. And I'm also just want to say thank you to IC for inviting me as well. And thank you all for being here. I'm so grateful to see you, to have you, to see this interest in this topic. Um, and Kristen, thanks for highlighting my approach to the positive. I see myself as a pos scholar, a scholar of positive organizational studies aligned with humanistic management, but then I also see value in exploring the dark side, the dark triad, in this case, pointing that out and bringing a critical lens to these important positive topics such that they don't become overly optimistic and leave us with blind spots as well. This work that I'm presenting today, it's been an ongoing project. So in 2024, our team of collaborators um, published a paper in the Academy of Management, Learning and Education. And so that's with colleagues Miguel Pina y Cunha at Nova Business School in Lisbon, Stuart Clegg, who's at Sydney University, and Armenio Rego at also in Portugal at the he's in Porto Catholic University. We have collaborated on a textbook for positive organizational behavior. We've also published on compassion as a relational approach, organizational compassion. This book, or sorry, this paper explored dark triad in leadership, specifically with an education focus, which I know is really important for the International Humanistic Management Association as well. That emphasis on pedagogy and how we train future leaders. And so the paper we published was about challenging a popular notion and narrative that has emerged in recent decade or over a decade, how to be effective as a leader, you need to, you can't play nice. You have to bring you have to play the game of power, so to speak. We'll look more at that in the shortly. That paper received a lot of positive response, and the Academy of Management Insights published a summary that was their most downloaded paper for 2024. And in fact, I'm going to give you a copy at the end of this presentation. I'll share a QR code with you. And I asked them this morning at the Academy of Management Insights if I could share it with you, and they said, absolutely. They gave me a PDF to share, so I'll give you a QR code where you can download that. And then from that, we came to write a book where we explored these topics more deeply. And that's a book that will be published in November, Dark Triad in Leaders, A Critical Approach, published by Edward Elgar. And I have a QR code at the end. I'm going to ask you to request your librarian to pre-order a copy so as to get the word out. So what we were challenging in that paper, and not only, even in this session today, is a notion that to be effective as a leader, you essentially have to play dirty. And this is taught in leading business schools today. It's advocated by leading management and organizational studies scholars. And I would say it's even a popular idea in broader society. Um, I just want to iterate that I don't want to comment right now on current political events and current political climate. Keep it focused on the research. And I guess a business management focus with historical examples, just foregrounding that. So yeah, what you see on the screen, some papers from Financial Times, The Economist. The Economist article has an image of a shark who's ascending the corporate ladder or to the pillars of power, so to speak. And keys to power, pathways to power is a course that is also being taught in business schools in not only leading yeah, universities across the country and the world. There is some research to suggest, there is some research that supports this idea that playing dirty is what is most effective, and especially this. So keys to power. Why? Because if you do a scan across people in key leadership positions, you may very well find, well, research has found that um, they tend to um, overly represent dark personality trait characteristics. So there is research that supports this. And so when a scholar um, says, yeah, there is research to show that in order to be to get the keys to power, you essentially have to have these, or at least you need to mimic these dark triad or dark personality characteristics. There is a basis to that. And that has formed a narrative now that is out there in the broader cultural milieu. These characters, larger than life characters, um, they tend to have high visibility, they're dramatic flair, anecdotes that are told about them, and then the media plays them up as well as celebrity characters. What we do in our paper is not just to see how these dark triad personality types tend to gravitate towards power, but we also look at the effects of their being in power. And that's our counter narrative. So yes, we may say, granted, this may be a pathway to power, and there may be evidence to support that. But let's look at the effects of that over the long term. And why it's important that we have this counter narrative, because when we talk about management, it's not physics. So how you teach physics doesn't change the nature of the electrons. Yeah? But how you teach management does affect how people enact management. When you go to a business school, when you go to a school of management to learn leadership, to learn effective management behaviors, you're going to be informed by the theories you learn. One of the strongest arguments in this regard is put forth by Ghoshal. Ghoshal 2005 Academy of Management Review. Why bad management theory is leading to bad behavior. I can't remember exactly the title, but it's one that had great impact and drew a lot of interest and opened up a conversation, calling on management educators to look at what we're teaching and what effect it's having on management leadership practice. And then he was calling for other theories, more positive theories of management and organization. So the dark triad personality types, they are an unholy trinity of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Narcissism, as in Narcissus, named after the Greek myth of someone who fell in love with their own reflection and couldn't leave the pool where they were gazing upon their beauty, their own beauty. And so essentially, this is a characteristic personality type of grandiosity, self regard to an extreme level, a sense of entitlement. The other characteristic or type is Machiavellianism, named after the medieval philosopher. Yeah, Machiavelli. We might describe him as a philosopher. He was a realist philosopher. Today, who might have been called a researcher. Essentially, he looked over history and he saw who were the people, the larger than life personalities of history, and he found that they had a type which he described as one of cleverness, cynicism, manipulation. He spoke about the lion and the fox, so projecting power, projecting authority, but then being tricky and cunning like a fox to get your ends met. And then the psychopath who's just brutal, doesn't really care what other people feel, what effects they have on others. They're callous, they're impulsive, they lack empathy, they have no regard for the other. So they use exploitation, manipulation to get what they want. So any one of these traits can be brutal. The three together in concert, and that's a constellation, an unholy constellation, is when these three come together in the same personality. And that's what we're talking about here. So we have psychopaths, we have Machiavellians, we have narcissists, and then the combination becomes deadly. And the research suggests that these people gravitate towards power. They gravitate towards power in organizations. And so, as I said earlier, a narrative that's formed around that as well. We better teach people how to achieve power by enacting these types of behaviors. So the basic idea here is that we observe that a number of celebrated leaders have these DT, dark triad characteristics. Therefore, managers must adopt similar behaviors in order to be effective in leadership. An example here is Pfeffer's leadership BS. And if you look at the table of contents, it's everything contrary to what an organization like the International Humanistic Management Association would advocate. That effective those who actually achieve leadership roles, yeah, they're not modest, they're not humble, they're not authentic, they don't tell the truth, they're not trusted, They don't care about being trusted or liked. They're self-centered, and um, yeah, those are the types of behaviors you ought to adopt in order to get there. He has a chapter at the end, Fixing Leadership Failures, about what we might do in an ideal world where this realist situation were not the case. But it's essentially the argument is this is the case. Ideally, we could fix it at an organizational, societal level, but until then, you have to play the game in order to be successful in in our society. So what we did is we looked at different cases of these types of personalities and their effectiveness as leaders over the long term. Um, we looked at many different cases, but this is just one standout case. Jack Welch, at one time greatly admired in the media and the press, uh, described as, well, his influence was spread across organizational practices. He was the CEO of GE, but his approach to leadership and management in the 80s, basically the practices he established there were replicated in organizations across not just America, but the developed world. Approaches such as firing your bottom 10% of performers annually to create a hyper-competitive, toxic environment in your organization, but essentially it's seen as survival of the fittest and cleaning your gene pool, so to speak. You're just enhancing the quality of your talent each year through this type of practice. At one point, um, the influence of Jack Welch was described as being as such that if he were to jump off a bridge, half of Fortune 500 would follow him in doing the same. Sounds like an exaggeration, but at the time, such was his influence. But then we look long term over what happened to the organization he led. Essentially, it got hollowed out, and there was a long term decline in its sustainability. Today, with hindsight, he's looked back at as the man who broke capitalism, how he gutted trust, how he eroded um, decency in uh, organizational leadership in corporate America and perhaps beyond. A key misunderstanding in this theorizing is a limited idea of what power is. So, a view of power, and again, this is uh, another book, Seven Rules of Power, essentially dark triad type approaches to being effective and successful in corporate America today. Again, this is taught in leading universities as how you can be an effective leader. The limited view here, it's a short-term view. It's of power as domination, where you control others, where you're able to where A is able to cause B to enact their will. So that's what we refer to in I use power theory in a lot of my work. So we refer to that as a single dimensional view of power, and a broader multi-dimensional view of power sees it as coacted, co-constructed, co-created through relations of mutual interest and support, mutual respect. And so uh, personalities like Mary Parker Follett, she advocated a circular view of power as something that we can elevate through mutual respect and a sense of our shared interest in supporting one another. A relational view of power is not the idea that's being put forward here. And the problem with it, a domination view of power, is that it's it's fragile, it's expensive to maintain. It's fragile because it can collapse easily because it doesn't have widespread support. It's not founded on legitimacy. It's founded on bullying, control, fear, and so it's not sustainable. Whereas a circular relational view of power indeed is. Um, a relational view, circular view of power sees power continue to expand and ripple out. So, how do we manage for the dark triad? There's some important characteristics to understand. The first is that dark triads do not emerge in isolation. They don't become all powerful in and of their own. There is collusion, so to speak. There are followers that acquiesce to that dark triad personality, and there is the environment, the organizational environment that allows or enables that personality to become dominant. And there's a nice metaphor where the dark triad leader is compared to the spark, the followers to the flammable material, and then the organizational environment to the oxygen. So without the support of followers who are either conformers or colluders, colluders are those that see opportunity in collaborating with the dark triad personality. They're thinking that they're going to be able to manipulate them as well, get their way, eventually that they have something to gain through this. Conformers are a coward into supporting the DT leader. The colluder sees advantage in collaborating and they let go of their own values in order to support that personality. In terms of the organizational environment, um, the situations where these personalities kind of emerge include moments of crisis when there's a sense that the organization is under threat. We don't have an answer. And then the dark triad character emerges to offer some kind of narrative where they can solve the situation. So, a crisis, whether real or imagined, whether real or fabricated through narrative, is an environment, perceived threat, and then when governance mechanisms are eroded, where they're weak. So we'll talk more about some of this when we consider what we could do as educators. I think that's the most important contribution of this paper and book is how to manage for this dark triad character, personality type from hijacking organizations, hijacking leadership. And so, as educators or leaders of organizations, so not necessarily just at a business school where you're a professor, but HR leaders, anyone in a leadership role within an organization, what we can do is we can educate through inoculation, teaching students about the dark triad personalities, how to spot such characters, what the characteristics are, what the effects of such leadership is long term. So, case lab, reviewing case studies of such personalities and their effects longer term, developing follower characteristics where they're not going to be colluders or um, to cower to such personality, or at least to be aware when where that tendency may be, so as not to facilitate the emergence of such leaders. And then we have three lines of defense where skills can be built. So first line of defense is in screening and spotting dark triad leaders or traits and characteristics in recruitment and selection. So this can be taught, but it could also be enacted in HR departments to be aware of such um, tendencies. So don't entirely rely on self-reports and resumes, narratives. Uh, Machiavellians are very manipulative. They're good at putting forth a, an endearing, charming narrative. So yeah, to be aware of that, having multiple sources of information when we're recruiting, particularly people for managerial roles, leadership positions, there needs to be a thorough vetting and consideration of such characteristics. Identify red flags, rule bending, a lack of ethics or a lack of ethical judgment as a red flag, and that should be given due attention. So, related to this first line of defense, some questions that can be asked in recruitment. When did you fall short? What did you learn? Probing for self-awareness and ethics. What values do you most align with? And how you might change um, an organization. What steps you might enact to affect change. The second line of defense is to reinforce governance structures. So, yeah, it's interesting when you study these personalities, they have a way of eroding governance structures, um, appointing their own people or those colluders into important roles, and then just undermining those structures such that they have no effect anymore. And so these need to be protected, reinforced within organizations. We need to teach our students the importance of having strong governance, the importance of creating cultures of psychological safety, of having lines of accountability, but also forums for people to express their their needs, their experiences, having ombudspersons that are where people can bring their concerns, independent boards, external auditors as well. And then what we reward, recognize within organizations is also really, really important. If we're only rewarding results, then we may be reinforcing a culture where even though we say our values are trust and dignity and humanity, and if we're only rewarding output, then it creates a culture where people are not respecting dignity and trust, but they are looking for the means to be seen as the one with the higher level output and doing whatever they need to do to achieve that. And so we need to be not only recognizing the output, but how that was achieved and recognizing and rewarding the culture and the behaviors that we want to see reinforced within our organization. Third line of defense, yeah, culture hack. Okay, so recognizing humility, and then also, so humble leaders, my own research shows this, they make better decisions. Dark triad leaders don't, because they only take their own views into account and they ignore the views of the experts and science. And so not only do humble leaders make better decisions because they're listening to others, but their teams also support them more because they see that there's been a balanced process to their decision making. So, and that their own concerns have been taken into account. And so they can better get behind the decisions that are made, and um, they feel more supported in their own practices. So yeah, reinforcing humble leadership within the organization. Third line of defense, and this is kind of last line of defense. Your first line has been breached, your second line breached, and now we're at a third line. What do we do? The dark triad leader is already there at the helm of the organization. And so, yeah, that's a difficult position to be in.
Mhm.
Try to avoid them as much as possible. Recognize where your boundaries are, where your lines are, and um, what your what's the word as a phrase? Deal breaker. Where's your deal breaker? Right? Um, so that's a second line as a second behavior. That's your armor, boundaries, documenting what's happening, keeping a record, and then knowing what your deal breaker is. And then the third is um, your actions, where knowing when to push back or where you can push back, knowing when you're going to exit when a certain red line gets crossed and your your values say that you can no longer remain within the organization, but then also be aware of the risk of retaliation because dark triad leaders, they have it within them to try to destroy those who show any kind of resistance to them. So we come to some conclusions. Toxic wins is not good theory. It does have some place. There is some research support for it, but when you look at the broader context, it actually doesn't hold up. The conclusion that because dark triad personalities or behaviors show have a tendency towards leadership emergence, therefore we ought to adopt similar behaviors is flawed logic. And it's not something that we should be teaching because it's not good for organizations long term. It's not good for culture. It's not good for relationship. It's not good for staff retention, satisfaction, performance, long term, reputation, stakeholder relations, supplier relations, all of that gets destroyed long term um, in an organization that is led by an unfettered dark trad personality as a leader. Also, a flawed or limited view of power is behind that notion. Domination, power, one-dimensional, as opposed to a multi-dimensional view of power as circular and relational. And therefore, what can we do? We can educate. We can educate within our organizations. We can educate within our educational institutions, business schools, management schools. We can publish and research as well. And then what we educate can be helpful, keeping in mind these three lines of defenses. First line, spotting the dark triad personality, knowing how to recognize that personality. Second line, having strong governance structures to protect the organization from such personalities. Third line, just knowing yourself how to act or respond to such personalities. So there we conclude. We invite any comments or questions.
Wonderful, thank you. So do
Thank you.
we have questions from the audience?
Oops.
And actually, maybe I will make a nod back to one of my prior institutions where we had a culture of starting the colloquium questions with a question or a comment from the student. And I know, Dr. Simpson, several of your students are here, so perhaps one of the brave ones can unmute their mic and ask the first question.
So who are our brave students here?
Yes.
You know, they tend to be quite shy, actually.
Okay. Give them a couple more seconds if one wants to jump in.
Yeah, there are two raised heads, so
Okay. All right. We'll give them a pass right now. Dr. Shoemaker?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Simpson, for your summary of kind of the Dark Triad and leadership is teaching an IO class up here for in Canada for about 20 years and doing some research with companies on hiring practices. One of the things that we found is that actually people with certain kinds of triad qualities do have a role in companies if you keep a close eye on them, particularly in closing down, particularly a department, and also in some kind of startups in foreign countries. But you have to put them on a limited contract for like 3 years, and then you get rid of them, and you give them a very specific focus. Because if they stick in the company, then as you have well demonstrated, they become toxic. But we got to remember that leadership has many, many qualities and many personalities, and you got to make leadership fit the situation. So if you're looking at long-term commitment to a company and building your values, I agree the dark triad can become extremely toxic, but there are very limited roles on occasion you can hire and use somebody like that in a very specific circumstance. Have you seen any research to support that?
I'm appreciating your nuance, Dr. Shoemaker. So I'm appreciating what you're sharing there. Um, the research I looked at, no, it wasn't, it didn't have that nuance that you're suggesting. The research that I have looked at um, has found where, yeah, these personalities can be effective in negotiation, in but it's all short term, as you're rightly recognizing. And so a more enlightened organization may find the ways to engage such personalities. I'm appreciating what you're suggesting there. I haven't seen that nuance, so thank you for bringing that to our attention. Have you published on that?
No, but we do have an algorithm that we've used to identify these people in a hiring company that I started 20 years ago. But the algorithm changes because of the context of the company. So you have to update it on a regular basis by with the employees that are hired. But we did have a pretty successful algorithm in pointing out those very driven leaders that are only into results and not into the long-term values of your company. But I didn't publish it as a study. We used it in hiring.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, Machiavellians can shake things up for sure. Uh, um, narcissists, they can bully in negotiations, but definitely, yeah, I guess if you really had a clear sense of where that might be applied
Mhm,
strategically,
mhm.
but I would definitely, as you're saying, would not recommend for that to be a long-term position
Mhm.
within an organization and a way that an organization wants to be seen even as
Mhm.
functioning. That's not the reputation you want to be to hold,
Yeah.
where your suppliers no longer trust you because you just bully them into deals that don't work for them.
Mhm.
And so for the short term, you might appear to be saving money, but longer term, you're looking for other for other partners, for other organizations to be working with. Yeah,
Aisha?
Thanks, Kristen, and thank you, Ace, for such clear ideas on an important topic and super timely. And so my two questions. One is, have you ever like how can we teach and develop dark triad leaders themselves? If we have a dark triad leader in our classroom, which may not be super common, but it maybe it is, what is their response to be learning about this trait or how to navigate the consequences of this trait? That's kind of one question. And the other question is, what about the other side of this equation in the sense that I've been thinking a lot about this on how we judge humanistically oriented, maybe more positive leaders. Do they really counteract, like in the sense that something that the dark triad leaders are doing that the maybe more positive humanistic leaders aren't doing that is appealing. So I don't have a clear idea of where that might go, but maybe you've also given it some thought on the other side of how we judge, evaluate, promote more positive humanistic leadership, individuals who demonstrate those traits.
yeah, thank you for that. So we do discuss this in the paper and in the book that so there's a couple of things. One is that people who are more prone to take risks are also more prone to business degrees. There's research that supports that. Students who are less likely to seek counseling or mental health support. So business degree students are less likely to seek that kind of care. So that's interesting. And in the paper, in the book, we talk about how when discussing these things, students might be aware, might become aware that these characteristics are there in themselves. And that's helpful. So there's self-awareness. And they can start to develop some self-awareness around those tendencies and characteristics and to see the limitations of that mode of behavior longer term for any leadership role that they may hold. And so we believe that um, positive humanistic leadership approaches can be learned. They can be taught and they can be learned. And so that self-awareness is a positive, it's a benefit. And when a student becomes aware that they have those tendencies there, I think, even we ourselves as researchers might become aware of this tendency one way or another. We learn how to manage it as well, or I like what you said about counterbalancing. When we cultivate humility, when we cultivate listening skills, when we cultivate empathy and compassion, um, these are not just traits, those are also learned behaviors. So they are traits, but they're also behaviors that we can learn. They're practices that we can learn. Evan and Laura are here from the Center for Compassionate Leadership. So they teach compassionate leadership. They teach people how to develop those characteristics. And I believe anyone can learn them, even if we may have an inclination or a tendency towards those other characteristics. Society, culture can help us mold or curtail those behaviors and cultivate our higher instincts, our better angels, so to speak. But if society and culture is telling us, no, this is fine, actually, it's a good thing. Those are the pathways to power. Those are the keys to power. Then I think that's a very unfortunate situation. And it's irresponsible of us as managers, management educators, business educators, as leaders to not highlight that and to not talk about that. Yeah, thank you.
If
Questions?
if we have other people with questions, you can just hit that raise your hand feature and we can call on you. But in the meantime, I have just a curiosity question. And is that, have you gotten any feedback from proponents of toxic winds?
No, we haven't. Which is interesting. It's been the other side. It's it's scholars who have who have researched these things,
Mm-hmm.
have written in with a lot of support and a lot of enthusiasm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we haven't actually heard from we haven't been challenged.
Well, maybe perhaps that's not surprising. That maybe they think, well, our approach is right, and
Right. Yeah.
let's not be humble enough to engage.
Yeah, perhaps. But yeah, from the other scholars who research power, who research dark triad leaders, uh, I guess more with this critical view rather than being, yeah, or let's hope a more objective stance. They
Mhm.
have reached out and expressed support and appreciation for this work. We should arrange a debate, maybe.
Yes.
Would be fun.
Are there other people raising hands?
Can
Oh,
I
but we
share
do
my
have a
gift?
question from one of your students in the
Ah,
chat.
okay.
Um, who says, I cannot talk right now, but my question is about Jack Welch. It seems like although he was cruel, his means were successful. Because of his bottom 10% policy, wouldn't the virus he was spreading cause the market to become more competitive and efficient as employees had to be productive to stay employed?
So, I mean, definitely there's a logic to the approach. There's definitely a logic, and there is, he was seen to be effective in the immediate. What happens is long term, the organization is eroded. All trust and goodwill, mutual support, care and kindness, it gets eroded through these types of practices. He took bold moves, bold decisions, but they didn't all pay off. Longer term, GE, it was one of the most powerful corporations in America in its time. And where is it today? So yeah, there is an argument, there is a logic to those approaches, and they became very widespread.
Mhm.
Why are they not enacted today?
Mhm.
Because they were seen to actually create a toxic workplace environment. Most organizations, GE does not enact that process, does not have that approach today. They have an entirely different approach to performance review, appraisal. They don't even do annual review or quarterly reviews. They have a ongoing approach. They have apps that they use to give feedback and mutual support.
Mhm. Gerard?
Yeah, I was just wondering, based on a couple of questions that have been raised, I think we seem to be taking a narrow definition of what effectiveness is and defining it only in financial terms. So I think implied in your presentation and your discussion was a much broader understanding, more like a multiple stakeholder view of what effectiveness is. So when we think about effectiveness only in financial terms, we are seeing it as a zero-sum game almost, that, if you benefit financially, it's okay to lose on the human front or the employee front. And I think I just wanted to highlight that perspective here. And I think such narrow definitions of effectiveness are in themselves dangerous and feeds the DT notion of what we're talking about. So
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for highlighting that, Gerard. Much appreciated. You're absolutely right there to point out that when we talk about effectiveness, we can think of it just in terms of financial returns, or we can think of it more broadly, as you said, in terms of a stakeholder community benefit orientation. Great paper, Harvard Business Review, Porter and Kramer, Creating Shared Value. So a notion of success as a mutual benefit for all stakeholders and society more broadly, solving society's problems. And through that's that circular view of power as well, right? Co-created, co-enacted power. Thank you for that, Gerard. I want to share my gift, if I may.
Yes, please.
So there's a QR code for a summary of these ideas. Yeah, good. We're seeing some
Great.
words go up in front of the screen, which is great. Thank you.
Yes. And this, I know that we do have a hard stop for you right at 1 p.m.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
I want to take this time for a big thank you for joining us and sharing with us your work on the Dark Triad and these wonderful, and I would say kind of inspiring ways of dealing with this. As somebody who has dealt with some of this Dark Triad stuff on a professional side, I'm thinking if only you had written this article maybe 3 or 4 or 10 years earlier, I'd have been better prepared. So thank you so much for that. And also a reminder to everybody that if you have not officially joined, we would encourage you to join the International Humanistic Management Association, get more involved. I posted our link here. We also have 2 more colloquia coming up this semester. We're moving them to Tuesdays this year. So we have one October 28th. And then normally we do that last week of the month, but with Thanksgiving, we are moving the November one up to November 18th. So I posted those dates in the chat. So please mark your calendars. Speakers are to be determined. And again, thank you all for joining us and sharing your afternoon today. Thank you, Aisha, for pulling this together. And thank you, Dr. Simpson, for joining us.
It's a pleasure, an honor to be with you. Thank you all. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.